Stephen, hi, and thank you so much for joining me on Faces of Digital Health to talk about a very increasingly important topic, that's brain-computer interfaces. The idea is not new, but what is new is that brain-computer interfaces are increasingly used not just in clinical testing, but also in humans. According to Neuralink, 12 people worldwide have received their brain implants so far. So this is optimistic on the one hand, plenty of questions and maybe some fear related to to people becoming cyborgs on the other hand. So thank you again for being here to explain how these things work, where are the potentials, and how does this fit into healthcare systems.
Thank you for having me, Tjaša. My pleasure.
So let's start with explaining the basics. So brain-computer interfaces are very promising. How do they get implanted into the brain without causing brain damage? How likely is it that damage will happen? And how difficult is it to remove an implant?
I'll start by saying that brain-computer interface, but the whole concept of taking your brain and a computer and connecting them together is a concept that people really talked about for a very, very, very long time. And there are different ways of obviously doing that, but the simplest form, it's essentially taking the signals from the brain that are generated in the brain by our own intentions or thoughts, and then taking them and connecting them with a computer to do something. And there's different ways of thinking about it, but the current definition that most people look at it is that we're taking out the neural signals generated from your brain and then translating them, decoding what they actually mean, and then using them to generate another signal in order to control something or send signals back into the brain, for example. Now, there's different ways of doing brain-computer interfaces. Before, many of them were like an EEG, like a scalp electrode. You could just read the signals from the surface of the brain. And we've done that for quite a few decades, but the resolution of that data isn't very good. It's like listening to a conversation through a wall with your ear up against the wall because the people are talking in the room, but you've got the wall, which is like your skull and your scalp. So you really can't get a lot of information, but it was easily accessible because that was non-invasive. You didn't actually have to go into somebody's brain to get those signals. What's happened in the last few decades is brain-computer interfaces are sort of divided into two camps, the non-invasive ones and the invasive ones. And the invasive ones means you have to undergo some kind of a procedure to get the interface itself, which is the actual physical object that is required to read the signals out of the brain. That's the interface, put into the neurons, which are the cells of the brain, to record that information. And the reason why invasive BCI is so interesting is it's really the research and science in invasive BCI that had resulted in performance that can truly replicate and provide value to people perhaps who are paralyzed or cannot communicate. The on the surface, less invasive, non-invasive BCIs, as far as we know now, haven't really achieved that level of performance. So you can get those signals, but they're really not as useful. So now the invasive BCIs, fall into other camps, and generally they all require some kind of an operation or procedure to place these things in. Now, some are placed in the brain itself. They actually are like little electrode needles that are placed into the material of the brain itself. Kind of like when you have an IV placed, we go right into the vein to get some information, right? Some are put on the surface of the brain as well, too. And then some are actually now placed into the blood vessels as well, too. But if, again, using this analogy of, let's say we're trying to listen into a conversation at a cocktail party, let's say you and I are in conversation, the best way to listen to it is to be standing right there with us, right? Right here between the two of us, listening. And that is what a intracortical or an invasive BCI that goes into the brain itself can do. Those electrodes can listen to our conversation. Those that listen on the surface of the brain, it's better than listening with your ear against the wall because you're trying to hear through, but you're in the room, but you're not actually with us. So you're trying to, you're trying to listen in on conversation, but there's like 5 people around you. You kind of catch stuff. So just to give you an example of why we're focusing on invasive BCI and even talking about the risks of it is like, well, why would you do that if there's an easier and safer way to get signals? And the reason is because invasive BCIs reading out neural signals from the individual neurons themselves provides us with the maximum amount of information. And the science has shown us that that's the information that we can get to really be able to translate what the neural thoughts are. So, over the last couple of decades, we have, before doing human trials, placed these electrodes into animal models, and they've been very safe. We've been able to implant them, we've been able to remove them, we have been able to place them without damaging the brain. And the next generation implants are better. They're smaller. And the smaller the electrodes get, here's an example. I'm sure you may not have had it, but you've seen people with acupuncture. They put acupuncture needles in, and some of these people have needles all over the place, but they take them out, they don't draw any blood. You can make the needles small enough, there's actually very little damage whatsoever. And the electrodes that we're placing in the brain for these intercortical invasive BCIs, they've gotten so small now that we know theoretically they're at the level that they should not be causing damage per se of the brain. They're just sort of going into that area there. And we
Mhm.
also know from having done experiments with humans and non-humans that we can safely implant these, and this isn't a significant risk. And what I always like to say as a neurosurgeon is that many people are scared of brain surgery, but I do brain surgery on a regular basis. If you need it, let's say someone has got a tumor, they're going to go under anesthesia, they're going to have their head open, they're going to have whatever surgery is done, they're going to have everything put back together, woken up, and more often than not, actually the vast majority of cases, they wake up and they're fine. It's a safe procedure. So the whole concept of
Mhm.
you have to go into your brain to do something sounds scary, but it's something we do every day. But I was also trying to explain why it's so important to get those things, why you want to be listening to those neurons right there as close as you can possibly get.
Mm, I guess the scary part comes from the fact that I guess you have to drill something in the skull to get through the bone, or
Well, I mean, God and the creator, the brain is very important and protected it. It put it inside of the skull. It covered it with a skull with bone in order to protect the brain. So it's very hard to get to.
yeah.
So in order for us to actually get to the brain, in order to get to those neural signals, yes, we have to open up the skull. We have to open up the covering of the brain, actually implant something to the brain. So it sounds scary, I think, Tjaša, especially if you're just talking to a layperson. But then if you start talking to no, neurosurgeons, obviously, we do this on a daily basis, and it's not so
Hmm.
scary because we can do this reproducibly. And patients obviously elect to undergo operations regularly as well too to treat their medical condition. So this is where it becomes important. If this is something that can treat a medical condition and provide you benefit, significant benefit, are you willing to undergo that risk? Because I think that risk is pretty low, but you touch on an important thing is that you have to have good performance.
Yeah, yeah. Um, There are several applications for brain computer interfaces. You mentioned people that are paralyzed. They can be used for psychiatric and cognitive therapies, for advanced neurological monitoring, etc. Can you explain a bit more how that signal translation is happening? How do you translate signals into something that's useful? One of the more impressive, I guess, to the lay public examples are when people that can't speak can suddenly communicate because those signals can get translated into words. And I'm wondering, how does that happen? How does that happen in different languages? How much do those signals differ? Does that mean that you need to develop a solution in each country to be able to decode those signals? Can you, in a simplified way, explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about that specific example, Tasha, because it's very cool. Because right now, when people talk about the applications for BCI, there are many potential applications and some future applications. And sometimes people will sort of sort of lump them all together. But what we do know we can do for currently with BCI, based on science and experiments that have been done in humans as well, is we can decode motor intent, meaning we can have you move a cursor on the screen or reach in space, or we can actually decode what you want to say. And even if, like I said, you can't speak, we can actually decode what your intention to speak is. And I'll explain that really quickly because just as an example. So what the BCI does is just reads out your neural signals. Every time you decide to do something, and sometimes unconsciously you're doing something, your brain has electrical signals that are generated from the neurons. So let's say right now I'm trying to say my name, Stephen. In my brain, I'm generating electrical signals that correlate to that. So the BCI takes those signals and puts it into a computer. The computer is then reading out those brain signals, and using computing power, we're able to correlate what those signals are, what intentions there are. So for instance, if I have myself reaching to the right, I'm just reaching to the right, I can read out brain signals, say, oh, when he reaches to the right, these are what the signals look like. When I reach to the left, oh, the signals look like this. And therefore now the computer knows, looking at the brain signals, these signals means he wants to move to right. These signals means this pattern means he wants to move to left. So similar to that with speech generation as well too, which is much more complex than just reaching around in space. There are certain parts of the brain that are specific for certain activities. Certain parts are for hearing, certain parts are for seeing, certain parts are for speaking, parts are for moving. The brain isn't a general object, but there's multiple areas that have multiple areas do different things. So the speech area we know we can tap into based on experiments, and then we can have you say things, and then we can correlate what you're trying to say with certain speech patterns. And then we can then put that now, because we have large language models and things, actually create a speech synthesizer that can actually take what you're trying to say and produce that speech. So there's a little bit of training involved with all these systems, Tjaša. None of these are, you plug it in and from day one it works. For every person, it has to be customized slightly, but even the training can be done in a much more efficient manner than used to be before. And you're asking about languages. Yes, the great thing is, you may speak a different language than I do, but our brains are mapped fairly similarly, meaning that where my brain is mapped for English is in the same area your brain is probably mapped for Slovenian, if that was your first language. So by
Mm,
tapping into that and taking advantage of the large language database models, we know what you're trying to say, and one we can train you, like say, yes, I was trying to say, water, and these brain signals came out, then we can actually teach it to basically say, oh, when she's trying to make these signals, when these signals generate, she meant to say water, for example.
mm, mm. Which area of development in the space are you most excited about? And also, which area is most developed so far? Is it the motor function restoration, so people can use prosthetic limbs and control them directly through brain-computer interfaces? How well developed is the restoring communication application to generate speech? So how do these different, applications follow each other in terms of development?
Yeah, so right now for BCI, brain computer interface prosthetics, because right now what we're trying to do is create a device that can be used to help patients who have diseases and problems. Try to do things like augmenting your brain, downloading your consciousness, things like that are way in the future. That's science fiction. We're not even close to that as far as basic science goes. So I think that's your question. What we do know with very strong scientific data is that we can decode motor and speech pretty well. Other things are still under development. So I think those are the two things that we can actually fairly strongly say we've got a lot of really good evidence that we can actually do this. And now that's why we're trying to develop a commercial product so we can actually deliver this to many people, not just subjects who've been in experiments so far.
How far is the development of applications for mental health? Uh, in a way, you know, this just reminded me of lobotomy, which used to be done to just treat some of the challenges with mental health. So, what's kind of the thinking in that area? How do you see that this could be used? Could it be, are the ideas going in the direction of replacing pharmacotherapy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Mental health is a very large market, which is why I think there's so much interest in that. And there's also some interest, I was a conversation with someone about this is if you have high blood pressure, Tjaša, how do I know that? Because I can do a blood pressure medicine, right? If you have diabetes, like how do I know your diabetes is in a good control? We do a blood test, right? If you're depressed, how do I know how depressed you are? I ask you how you're feeling. And that's a pretty subjective thing, right? So you have this large market of mental health and mental disorders, and we don't actually have very good ways of measuring how bad your mental disorder is or how well the treatments are working, because essentially it becomes, we can't image it or anything like that. So there has been a lot of interest right now in early science on can we detect signals from the brain state, coming up with what's called a biomarker or electronic signature, so that we can actually read out your brain state and be like, oh, you are depressed right now, or your depression seems to be quite bad right now. This is actually very early, though, very, very, very early, but there's a lot of interest in it because it's such a large addressable market potentially going forward. But this comes back to my original question as well, too. Are you willing to undergo an invasive brain operation in order to place an implant? And I would say, yes, you should, so long as there is a significant benefit associated with it, right, beyond what we have available. So I think it's very interesting to talk about it right now, but that scientific foundation for that doesn't yet exist. But one of the other issues we have, Chacha, there's a chicken and an egg problem. We can't implant, say, these things into a monkey or a non-human primate who's depressed and ask them how they're doing. You actually have to have
Mm.
a human who can interact with you in order to actually get a better understanding of the basic science of mental health states and whether or not we can use that or not. So it's one of those, until we actually have technologies like BCI available and in use, is when we're going to be able to answer the question of whether or not this is going to work or not.
Right, right, right. Since, the brain-computer interface is a piece of technology that goes into your body, how often does it have to be replaced? That's one of the questions that I had, because um, one of the immediate associations that I had when I started thinking about this technology is, what happens if you need an MRI? What happens if you need a CT scan? Is that incompatible? So how do you address that?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there. The first question you asked was about the longevity of the device.
Yeah.
How long should it last? Well, I have a question I'd like to ask you, Tasha. Let's say, obviously, you want them to last forever, but let's say I put an implant into you, you could not speak, and I put an implant in, and it could restore your ability to communicate, do a podcast like this, right? How long would you want it to last for? I'm sort of curious.
Forever.
What's the minimum you would accept? If I told you I would have to replace it in a certain number of years, how many years would that be? 5 years? 6 years? 2 years?
Ah, well,
Yeah,
I don't know, because I would first be interested in knowing the things that I asked before. So how long is the procedure? What's the
yeah,
rehabilitation after the procedure? If that's a non-issue, then I guess it's just like any other serious clinical issue
okay,
that you have. Your
mhm,
threshold of
mm,
what you're willing to go with, if it really improves your quality of life, is way different compared to, if you don't have any issues. So I don't know. I'm thinking once a year would be my, if it's not, if I would be convinced, I guess, that it's not that bad. It also depends on what the alternatives would be.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
No,
Which
you're
brings
asking.
us,
Mhm,
which brings us to the next question, which we're going to
mhm.
address after you respond,
Yes,
about, how diverse is the market at the moment? How does Paradromics differentiate on the market?
yes.
And, how do patients manage choice that's there, if it's even there?
Yeah, no, this is a great question because I truly believe that these implants need to last for a long time. You do not want to be going in and having repeat operations to have these things replaced. And there is good examples of medical technologies that are implanted in people, like pacemakers, keep people's hearts alive, deep brain stimulators that go into people's brain to treat tremors. Neither of these, by the way, are actually MRI compatible. Some are, but generally they're not MRI compatible as well. So there's already a pre-existing situation where people have implants put in the brain that prevent them from getting an MRI or useful CT. And that's been generally accepted because the benefits of that technology are such that they're getting a clinical benefit. So they just can't undergo an MRI or CT in those situations. I think initially the brace BCIs are putting now, they're going to have very similar limitations like that. But it's a fairly accepted limitation because we know that we have other devices like that. Now, how long do we have to last is a good question. I've asked this to many people, and it varies a lot. And I've always said it needs to last a while. If we can't be reoperating people on a yearly basis, and I would sort of say that in battery packs, sure, we swap those out every 2 to 5 years. I think that they can be handled. But going in and doing a brain operation, despite though there is safety involved, each time you go in, there are certain risks as well. So I think these things, honestly, we should be shooting for a shelf life about 10 years before you need to replace them, because that's
Mhm.
very similar with other implants we put in the human body, that if we're replacing them every 10 years, that seems to be a fairly safe number to sort of go for, you know.
Mm. We started this discussion with the question related to fear around brain
Mhm.
surgeries. Then you asked me about, the expectations on the duration of having a device in your body before it needs to be replaced. I'm sure you were in many discussions around how people or patients perceive brain computer interfaces and implantables in general. So what do you know about that in terms of what the research say? How open are people to the idea of implantables, which are seen as kind of the next step after wearables?
Right. And we're also talking about there's a difference between there's wearable, medical technology that and versus a wearable medical, a clinical device, right? Because there are a lot of things out there like Fitbits and Apple Watches that help monitor your health, but those are consumer devices, right? Things that are implantable generally don't tend to be they don't tend to be consumer device. They tend to be like medically necessary medical device that are treating conditions, right? Most people, you're right. When I first tell them, if I were to do an implant in your brain, how do you sound? They start with essentially a little bit of fear because most people don't understand craniotomy. They don't understand brain surgery, right? But there are a lot of things that we're fearful of that we don't understand, honestly. And once you have a conversation with them, I explain what exactly this would entail, what brain surgery is like, and how thousands of patients have brain surgery done every day, and your family members might have had heart surgery, hip surgery, other sorts of operations, and this is very similar. They stop and pause and say, okay, I guess that's right. But then the next question is, so let's say you do put an implant, what's it going to do for me? And this comes down to the performance as well, too. We talk about durability is very important. Safety is very important. And third thing is performance. Do these things work well? Do they replace your ability of what you want to do? And does it do a better job, Tasha, than other technologies? For instance, let's say I can't move, I'm paralyzed, but I can move my eyeballs around, right? So there are cameras that can look at your eyes and track your eyes. And you can type on a keyboard by looking at the keyboard, it will track your eyes. Eye tracking technology, it's non-invasive. You can basically, so why would I want to put an implant in? But you can imagine just right now, take your eyes and kind of look at your keyboard and try to type out your name. It's kind of hard and it's kind of slow. And what if you make an error, right? So the implants can make you just say you think your name and all of a sudden your name gets synthesized. That is performance, right? If you can really do that at a higher level, you're going to say, yeah, I'm willing to undergo the risks of an operation and get that kind of performance.
Mm.
And then people get excited about it too. And the people that have sort of signed on early on to have these implants put in by Neuralink and some of the other companies. I mean, they're sort of pioneers. I mean, they're really at the tip of the sphere. And they, if you listen to testimonials, they're incredibly excited about what they're doing for science, and they can actually talk to us and tell us like what their experience has been. And as far as like the operations and the recovery from things of that sort, they've actually had very little negative to say.
Mm. So how does Paradromics differ from other players in the market? What kind of differentiation do you see between companies that are developing solutions in the space?
Yeah, I mean, Paradromics, our goal really is to create a brain-computer interface platform. And why I think this is important is we have solutions, obviously. We're going to help people communicate, we're going to help people move, but we want to create a platform that can grow and develop for other applications as we discover them. So, when the iPhone first came out way back when, there was like the iPhone, the first smartphone. The iPhone I use now is 16 well, whatever, however many generations from the original. It's changed completely. It's a much better device. It can do so many things, and we've learned so many things about how we use digital devices as we develop them as well too. So, at Paradromics, our thinking is we're not trying to make a device that's going to help people talk again. We're not just talking. We're not going to make a device going to help you just to move around again, right? Our goal is to actually make a platform, a BCI platform that can be used for those things and then more. And the way we're going to do that is taking technology that we know in the lab has worked and taking it to the next level. Let me give you an example right now of LLMs. Like right now, people are saying, oh my God, AI is here. AI it just appeared out of nowhere. This is not true. AI has been around for decades. The fundamental computing algorithms behind what is being done with, say, ChatGPT has been around for decades. It's been the convergence right now of large language models, computing processors, and more AI research that has really come together at this moment where all of a sudden we have this like step function growth in what is happening. And this for BCI as well, too. I think we're here as well, too. We've had basic science research for a very long time. We've had interfaces that are getting better now. And when I have compute power that's coming together to once again, hopefully for us, this is the step function moment for BCIs as well, too. What Paradromics is doing is like we're actually leveraging all the science that has been up until now. We are using a implantable array technology that is sort of an advancement of what we have successfully used so far. We're using algorithms that we have used successfully so far in science and taking that to the next level as well, too. And this actually differentiates us from some of the other groups out there because many of them are coming out with new interface electrode arrays that haven't been tested before.
Hmm.
And they're coming out with new algorithms that haven't been tested before. And the more things you start to change, the more things that can go wrong. So what Paradromics is doing is like we're trying to take all the technologies and sciences that have been done so far, leveraging them to take them to the next level. But another thing we're also focusing on, and I think this is probably the best example, like key differentiators, like we're sort of the optical high bandwidth internet at your house because we have built into our system the ability to decode and to transmit and brain information at a bit rate that is much higher than any existing system out there. Because right now, doing motor tasks, you don't require a lot of information transfer. Doing communication speech, you actually do need a much higher level of information transfer. But if
Mm.
you're going to do more than that, you need an even larger level of information transfer. And we're building in a high bandwidth system, far higher than we need for current applications and far higher than anything that anyone else has out there.
Hmm. I just want to check if I got something right. So you mentioned that you're looking in the direction of creating a platform for multiple uses. Is that
Yes.
right? So basically the same device, but just programmed based on the patient and based on his needs.
And where it's located. So
Uh-huh.
the BCI records signals from parts of the brain, but depending on what part of the brain it's in, you're going to have a different application. For example, we put in the motor area, we can read out your intentions and move a robotic arm. We
Mm-hmm.
put it, let's say, in the hearing area, and all of a sudden we can restore hearing because we can listen things and actually send signals into the brain where you're having hearing. So that's where this whole thing becomes a generalized input-output system platform, and that's what the goal of most BCI systems are, and definitely ours as well.
Mm-hmm. How do you see concerns, and what's the state of cybersecurity of these devices? How is it possible to hack them? Is there a danger for that to happen?
So that's an interesting question because any device obviously has a risk of being hacked. But when people say hacking, the question is the following. Am I able to, let's say you have a BCI that's implanted in your brain. Does that mean with current technology, can I read out your thoughts? No. Can I download who you are, your consciousness? No. Can I go and stimulate and put in like thoughts and control your mind? No. We're nowhere near that from a scientific standpoint. So the fact that, yes, can you hack it because it's an electronic device? And by definition, any electronic device can be hacked. Yes.
Okay.
But the likelihood of it causing a problem that is going to be clinically significant, at least with today's technology, because we are so primitive, is actually
Mm-hmm.
next to nothing, really.
Yeah.
Now, in the future, let's say
Yeah,
we,
I was just about to ask if this is how do you see that this is going to change in the future? Is it going
yeah.
to be possible? Yeah.
I suppose like in the possible, but at the same time too, I mean, you're carrying around your phone and people can hack into these things pretty easily as well, right? I mean, there are people that can basically anything that's transmitted wirelessly, you can download that information. But we have safeguards and security, even currently existing. What we do right now, end-to-end communication, there's encryption involved as well too. So assuming that people take a certain amount of a level of like security precautions, right? I don't see why this would be different from a sort of any other sort of potential security risks that are out there.
Mm. And now my anxiety levels have risen a little bit again.
Okay.
um, One thing I really wanted us to discuss is the business models for these solutions.
Mhm.
What's the business model of Paradromics? How are you thinking about future development of business models? Is it fair to expect that healthcare insurance companies are going to do this? And one of the reasons I'm asking this is because the first episode of a season of the series Black Mirror, I don't know if you saw that, but was basically addressing brain-computer interfaces where somebody lost the ability to function. They got a brain-computer interface, but the business model of the company was a subscription, and that subscription kept getting more and more expensive until all the user had left were commercials in their head. So yeah, scary. What's the reality with business models and affordability and accessibility?
I love science fiction. I think it's super fun to watch. I also think, just as a quick aside, it's funny how these future worlds where the computers take over and things are always so dystopian and negative. Because I think if there was a perfect world where implants are making us better, smarter, and happier, that really wouldn't be that exciting, right?
Mm,
Um, so the short answer is that these are initially now, these are they're medical devices. And as such, they're going to be regulated and controlled as a medical device. And they're going to be most likely treating because it's required by regulation right now. So we can't just you can't just ask me to put a BCI in your brain. That's not going to be allowed. So because of the strong regulatory framework most governments have, and these have to treat medical conditions, they're essentially going to be regulated as medical devices to treat a certain problem that you may have. And finding those indications is what's important, getting authorization and approval for those as well too. And once you do, then we work within the insurance framework to make sure that reimbursement sort of follows that as well too. Pacemakers, all these other implantable technologies, they've been around for a very, very long time. They started very expensive with limited indications, and now they're incredibly commonplace. They're well covered. The prices have gone down for these, the reimbursement as well too. And I don't see why that would be different. I mean, really, with the advent of commercial BCI, we're really opening up a brand new, almost like, business sector, so to speak, where there's going to be a lot of research and interest developing those sorts of things. But as far as science fiction goes, I do think it does bring up interesting clinical and ethical questions that are worth having discussions over. But the reality is when those become true concerns is quite far from now.
So I assume you also watched Severance. The
Yeah.
the Apple TV series where the story is around a company that enables people to have almost a dual personality, one that lives at work, the second one that lives at home, and they're completely separate. So you as a person don't really know what you as a person does in the work. Just for those that maybe do not know the series. So how did you see that as a, as a neurosurgeon?
Severance, I thought was great TV. It's great science fiction. I really enjoy that show. It also, in my mind, there are like so many holes in that and like how this would actually work and how you'd make this occur. So you have to suspend reality and assume that this is possible. And I will tell you that that is not what BCIs are for. That is not what BCIs can do now or any time that I can see in the far future, because there's so many things about our brain we don't really understand. And Severance specifically deals with consciousness, which is another part of, again, what I'm talking about, restoring vision communication, that's very different from like consciousness, right? And that is something we have very limited data and understanding, much how we can actually manipulate that with technology.
Mm, um, yeah, might go to YouTube or just, Google the neuroscientist's perspective on severance. I'm pretty sure there's some reviews from experts, looking at the holes in the story. What are you kind of most excited about in terms of the development of the field? How can you talk a little bit about the clinical trials and development of technologies? Do any patients already use solutions designed by Paradromics?
So Paradromics, we're starting our clinical studies hopefully early next year. We're going to submit to the FDA for our first clinical trial. We have done in vivo trials where we can implant the device and remove them without actually running an experiment or closing them up, just to show this procedure is safe. A few other companies, Neuralink obviously is in the process of running trials and some new trials to implant their device. And there's a lot of examples of those patients who have gone on to make amazing demonstration videos of what they can do. And Neuralink has actually done a tremendous amount of good positive work for the BCI field in order to bring attention to the field, as well as to generate funding as well, which I think is generating a lot of good competitive technologies as well. So I think that's great. I think their patients are continuing to as well too. And we're hoping to start our trials. We're hoping to have our patients with implants in to show what we can do with our technology soon.
Is there anything that you're concerned about the development of the field or, trends that are happening in the development? What do you see as the most challenging things?
I think a lot of the things you are talking about right now, I'll tell you, there are two challenges. Right? There's two things that concern me most in the field. The first thing that concerns me is something you touched upon, which is that people don't understand BCIs in general very well. So when someone comes and tells them, we're going to put a BCI in and download your memories, people think, oh, if that's what they're saying, we must be able to do that somehow, and we cannot. Oh, we're going to be able to restore, somebody's vision, let's say, right, with a BCI. Sure, we could eventually, theoretically, but there's still a lot of work that's required to do that as well too. Mental health, you mentioned that as well too. Maybe, oh yeah, this would be a great place for mental health. I think there is a great potential there, but we're still not there right now. So but if you told me, oh, we're gonna implant a device and we're gonna be able to restore motor function, move a robot arm, I would be like, 100%. I know that can be done. It has been done. And that's a fairly straightforward thing. But for most people, trying to understand what BCI is and what the potential is kind of all over the place. Because I do have people coming up to me saying, oh, I don't want these things to be hacking into me and downloading memories into me. And I try to explain, we're so far from that right now. So fighting that is a challenge, and I wish. I'm hoping that people continue to sort of be very objective in getting their information from sources that are very reliable. What we really truly can do. What is science fact, and what is sort of science fiction?
Mm. So to recap, I know that we've discussed this at length, but still, if there was one or three things that you would wish people would know or understand about brain-computer interfaces, what would they be?
Now is a very exciting time for brain computer interfaces because technology and science has converged to a point that we can truly make this a commonplace device that's going to be part of what we do as humans. And I really am looking forward to a reality where people say, oh, I have a pacemaker. Oh, I had a hip replacement, Oh, I have a BCI to treat a medical condition. That's one thing I'm really excited and hoping for. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is people need to understand that we're still very early in our stages of BCI research and information. And many people are talking about the really scary things that can happen down the line, but we have a ways to get there. I don't know if you watched the movie Terminator. It's fun. It's a fantastic movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And that was explaining, that was all based on when we let AI take over and create robots, it's going to destroy humanity. That movie's 40 years old. And now you can realize the parallels of what's happening in our world today is quite interesting, right? With the rise of AI, with rise of robotics, and again, being not careful about who is actually allowed to control those sorts of things. But with BCI, like I said, we're so far away from having to address those issues right now, and that there's a lot of fundamental basic science and research that really needs to be done. But the third thing, really the most important, most exciting thing for me right now, Tjaša, is that this is the opportunity that we have to be able to provide and restore function to someone who can't speak and can't move. And that is an incredibly exciting and meaningful place to be. Imagine someone who's not been able to tell their loved one for years, I love you, or have a nice day. Imagine the impact of being able to do that for someone, or having
Yeah.
someone who can't move and they need to rely on people all the time. And it's very interesting because people say that, I'm always surrounded by people. I still feel very alone because they're not
Mm-hmm.
connected. They're not connected in a meaningful way. And that's where I think we can talk about the dangers of BCI in the future. We can talk about all these sorts of things, but at the very basics of what we're trying to do right now, that's what we're trying to do. Restore human function, improve their condition, and improve human connection. And
Mm.
that's really, really exciting to me, and that's what we should
Yeah.
be supporting.
Yeah. Speaking of exciting potential or untapped areas of healthcare, what's the potential or what do you see a role of brain computer interfaces in pain management? Because there's so much chronic pain that can't be addressed in any way that I'm sure many people would benefit and would be willing to change, that brain computer interface even on a yearly basis if that would mean that they would not be in pain anymore.
Yeah, that's very insightful, Joshua, because we're talking about indications for brain-computer interface, paralysis, speech and communication impediment, possible mental health, right? Vision, hearing, those things like that. We didn't talk about other things of neuromodulation. So there's an exciting field in neurosurgery, where in neurology and neurosciences, where the signal, the software in the brain is not working very well. So how do we sort of manipulate and modulate that? And in some people, they have chronic pain. The brain is where the pain is being processed, and it's there 24/7. And you're right. There are a lot of people who suffer from chronic pain. There have been some recent developments in neurosurgery of stimulating parts of the brain to actually help with chronic pain that's been actually pretty successful. So based on that, I absolutely agree with you that I think chronic pain is another potential future indication for BCIs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's hope so, because unfortunately, there's so many stories of people that just run out of options when it comes to fame. Um, you mentioned that AI, and I'm glad you did because I didn't ask you.
Sure.
Is the role of AI in BCI? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
AI has so many meanings right now. And I'll say for now, right now, AI has a couple roles. AI's role for current BCI is one, when we decode the signals from the brain, there's a very complicated computational model that has to be run. It used to take a while to train our models because the computational models, it took a long time. AI ML obviously can do it much faster, and we're hoping that will be used to decode the brain signals in a much more efficient way. I'm pretty sure it will be, right? On the other
Mhm.
side, AI can be used in order to develop a supportive, like when you like some sort of software or app. So once you get the signals out of the brain, you got to do something with them, right? Either control a robotic arm, like you said, right, or or generate speech, communication, or something like that. And on that end of the technology, right, once you got the signals out, what do we do with it? Those assistive technologies, many of them are going to benefit from AI as well, too.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I guess, AI is, there's probably not a field that AI wouldn't have an impact, to.
Right. But AI in
Yeah.
the sense of like it is like AI is going to change our consciousness or it's going to be able to download somebody's memory or AI into that's something that is really, really, really not even what BCIs are right now or what we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I actually meant more, in the sense, of how is it helping you to, accelerate your research and development?
Yeah, 100%. Development of algorithms, taking the neural signals out and doing complicated computations on that, that is absolutely supported by AI ML.
Mm. Stephen, thank you so much for explaining the basics. I feel like I was a 5-year-old trying to understand, really the scariest ideas that people might have. So hopefully this is going to be useful content to many. Is there anything that we haven't covered and you feel would be useful for people to know, or anything that you would also like to mention?
I mean, people fear the unknown, and humans are very good. We have tremendously great imaginations, right? So we always think
Mm,
about what can happen. That's what made us so successful. I think BCIs are not something to be afraid of. They're currently regulated. We're very early in where we're at, and at this point in time, it's either going to become adopted and something we're going to use going forward, part of what we do as humans, or they fail. But eventually it'll come back with technology and support to get to where we want. But at the end of the day, this is really intended to help transform people's lives, people that are sick and people have no other options available to them.
mm. And that's exactly what we need solutions for. So, again, Stephen, thank you so much and good luck with your further development.
Thank you very much. You too. Bye, Josh.